If you believe human history began with the wheel, the written word, or the ancient temples of Sumer along the Euphrates, then maybe, just maybe, you need to go further back. Much further, about 7,000 years earlier, to a time before cities had names, before pottery, before plows carved the earth. In a place where the desert didn't yet exist, and wild animals still ruled the hills of what we now call southeastern Turkey, someone built a temple, not a hut, not a stone circle, but massive T-shaped pillars, some over 18 feet tall, carved with images of lions, vultures, snakes, foxes, bulls, celestial patterns, and symbols we still can't decipher. Göbekli Tepe shouldn't exist. According to everything we know about evolution, about civilization, it came too soon. So who built it? And why, after all that effort, did they carefully bury it, as if trying to hide it for good? Maybe this isn't the beginning of civilization. Maybe it's a remnant of one that rose and vanished. Are you ready? Because this is the beginning of a journey, one that will take us deep beneath the dust of time, here on historic sleep, where the forgotten past whispers just beneath the surface. If you're drawn to stories like these, the ones that live in the shadows between what we see and what was made to disappear, feel free to like and subscribe only if it feels right, and let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? I love seeing our little map of watchers light up around the world. The first shovel struck dry earth in 1994 on a nameless hill outside the city of Şanlıurfa, near the Turkish-Syrian border. The dig was intended to be routine. Just a few shepherds and local farmers had reported some oddly shaped stones poking through the surface. No one expected much. After all, in this region, stone is everywhere, history is everywhere, and yet somehow, history still sleeps. But what the German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt uncovered wasn't ruins, not in the traditional sense. These stones weren't the leftovers of a village or the broken skeleton of a house. They were standing, proud, massive. 2 arms engraved on one of them, meeting in front of what could only be a stylized torso, suggesting the pillar itself was a being, a guardian, or perhaps a god. It didn't make sense. The carbon dating returned numbers no one was ready for, 9600 BCE, a time when, according to the textbooks, humanity was still fumbling with rocks and berries, before wheels, before metal, before writing, before agriculture. But here, in Göbekli Tepe, they'd arranged stones heavier than cars into concentric circles, aligned with the heavens, covered in sophisticated symbolism. Someone, long before the Sumerians ever pressed a stylus into wet clay, had built this place, and then buried it. There were no remains of houses, no hearths, no graves, only art, monumental effort, and mystery. This wasn't a settlement, it was something else. But what kind of culture invests such labor in a site where no one seems to have lived? What force could compel nomadic hunter-gatherers, people who should be busy chasing gazelles and gathering nuts, to gather by the dozens and carve limestone for years? The question gnawed at the edges of logic. And the stone fox carved into Pillar 43 seemed to watch. Was this the dawn of religion, the first temple, or something far older, something left behind by a civilization we've forgotten? A civilization that had already known, already lost, and left its memory buried under 22 feet of soil. It wasn't just the age that disturbed the timeline, it was the implication. If humans had come together for faith, for myth, for symbols, before they came together to farm, to build cities, to form laws, then everything we think we know about civilization is backward. Maybe myth didn't emerge from civilization. Maybe civilization emerged from myth, and that changes everything. Because buried in this hill, beneath centuries of dirt and indifference, is a story that suggests we are not the beginning. We are the continuation. So what did they believe, those people of Göbekli Tepe? What drove them to build? What vision stirred them in the dark between stars and fire? And what did they see just before they covered it all up? The fox returns again. Not just on Pillar 43, it reappears in other places, silent, carved into stone with a precision that belies the age of the site. Foxes in profile, foxes in motion, foxes between worlds. At first glance, it seems like decoration, the idle art of ancient hands. But then you start to notice the repetition, the positioning, the way the fox often appears beside vultures, serpents, or celestial motifs, sometimes walking in single file along the sides of the T-shaped megaliths, as if moving through time, or guarding something sacred. In ancient Anatolian mythology, recorded much later through the memories of the Hurrians and Hittites, the fox is not a simple creature. It is a trickster, yes, but also a messenger, a go-between. It slips between night and dawn, between earth and sky, between the living and the dead. And long before writing gave form to belief, symbols carried the weight of meaning. If the fox here is more than an animal, more than mere decor, then we are not looking at random totems. We are looking at a language, a visual script, carved in stone, whose grammar we've lost, but whose presence still hums like a forgotten melody beneath the surface. The layout of Göbekli Tepe reinforces the idea. These are not random placements. The site consists of multiple circular enclosures, each centered around a pair of T-shaped monoliths towering over the surrounding stones. It is not unlike a stage or a shrine. The central pillars, always facing each other, seem to embody a duality, perhaps guardians, perhaps opposites in dialogue. Male and female, heaven and earth, human and divine, and around them, lesser stones, also carved, forming concentric rings like ripples from a cosmic stone thrown into the void. What ceremony took place here? What truth did these people try to freeze in limestone? We don't know. But the architecture speaks a grammar all its own: repetition, symmetry, orientation. These were not the chaotic hands of survival. These were minds organized by meaning. The pillars are aligned in such a way that some researchers believe the enclosures reflect celestial events, particularly the rising of the bright star Sirius, the so-called dog star, whose heliacal rising marked the beginning of the agricultural calendar in later ancient Egypt. Sirius, of course, also associated with death, rebirth, and the underworld across many cultures. Could it be that even here, 11,600 years ago, they watched the stars, and from them drew stories of gods, animals, and cycles? Could the fox itself be a symbol of Sirius? Astrophysicist Giulio Magli proposed that the builders of Göbekli Tepe may have aligned their structures intentionally to mark astronomical changes. But if that's true, it pushes back the dawn of astronomy, not by a few hundred years, but by millennia. It suggests a culture capable of long observation, of memory, of passing knowledge through generations. But how? Without writing, without cities, without institutions? The implication is staggering. Because knowledge, like stone, does not stand on its own, it must be quarried, shaped, and passed down. It is effort. And yet, someone at Göbekli Tepe preserved memory in form and pattern so precise that it can still be measured in sky charts today. Did they know the precession of the equinoxes? Did they trace time not by seasons but by epochs? And if so, who taught them? We want to imagine the past as a slow climb from chaos to order. But what if it isn't? What if the climb is cyclic? What if knowledge rises and falls like the constellations above, burning bright for a moment, then forgotten for an age? The fox, silent and carved, still walks the stones. Its meaning escapes us, but its presence persists. It invites us to look again, not just at the carvings, but at the assumptions we carry when we look at the past. What if these people weren't just carving animals? What if they were carving memories? The lion is next, towering, teeth bared, muscles arched in mid-motion, its body frozen in relief along the limestone surface of one of Göbekli Tepe's outer pillars. At first glance, the lion feels out of place. There are no lions in this part of Turkey now. But during the Younger Dryas, an unstable climate period stretching from 12,900 to 11,700 years ago, this region was not yet a desert. It was a lush, fertile steppe, and lions, alongside aurochs and gazelles, still roamed the plains. But the lion here isn't just a predator. Its size, position, and placement among other figures, especially atop or beside serpents and headless humans, suggest it carried symbolic weight. The kind of weight reserved for kings, for protectors, or destroyers. And if we look across cultures, far beyond Anatolia, the lion consistently straddles the border between sovereignty and chaos. From the roaring guardian of Mesopotamian gates to the sphinxes of Egypt, from the Nemean lion of Greek myth to the divine avatars in Hindu cosmology, the lion almost always guards something. A threshold? A truth? A secret? So what was the lion guarding here? Some believe the lion, alongside the fox, boar, crane, and vulture, is part of a bestiary, a kind of cosmic map encoded in animal form. Not unlike the zodiac, but older, more primal. A myth told through flesh and claw. Researcher Martin Sweatman has argued that some of the animals carved at Göbekli Tepe correspond to constellations. For example, he links the scorpion to the actual Scorpius constellation and the vulture to Sagittarius. If that's true, the lion might represent Leo, a constellation often associated with the heart of summer, with solar power, with resurrection. The implications are enormous. If these stones reflect the stars, if they are, in essence, an astronomical codex carved in megalith, then we are not looking at primitive art. We are looking at a culture with time consciousness, with memory that exceeds a single lifetime, perhaps even one that understood the concept of precession, the slow wobble of the Earth's axis that shifts the stars over thousands of years. And if they could track that, then they were watching the sky not for seasons, but for epochs. But still, why lions? Because lions don't just symbolize courage or violence. In many traditions, the lion is the sun incarnate, a symbol of cyclical power, birth, zenith, decline, death, and rebirth. In alchemical manuscripts, the green lion devours the sun to represent a moment of transmutation, when matter is purified, spirit released. Could the lion at Göbekli Tepe signify something similar? A celestial devourer? A gatekeeper between this world and whatever lay beyond the stars? Or perhaps the lion is not just guarding time. Perhaps it is guarding memory itself. Consider this. The stones of Göbekli Tepe were deliberately buried. Every circle, every enclosure, carefully filled with debris, limestone fragments, and flint tools, not destroyed, not abandoned, but buried as if to preserve or hide. Who buries temples? Who spends generations carving monoliths only to entomb them under tons of rubble? The act itself is a kind of ritual, not erasure, but sealing. And here, again, the lion appears, like a sentinel at the final hour, watching the slow burial of a forgotten truth. Watching us, perhaps, as we dig up what they tried to hide. So, was the lion a memory of the stars? A symbol of solar kingship? A mythic guardian of cosmic cycles? Or was it a warning? It's the vulture that unsettles the most. Towering wings spread wide across Pillar 43, its gaze fixed forward, detached, almost otherworldly. Beneath its talons, a decapitated human. The carving is clear, deliberate. The figure's body remains, but its head is missing, floating instead above the vulture like an offering or soul caught mid-flight. For many years, archaeologists hesitated to interpret this scene. Was it symbolic, ritualistic, or something darker, evidence of prehistoric violence, or even death cults? But the answer, if there is one, may lie in the skies above. In ancient Egyptian cosmology, vultures were protectors, mothers even, their wings shielding pharaohs in both life and death. In Mesopotamia, the vulture was associated with the divine realm, a carrier of spirits between planes. In pre-Incan myth, the condor, a close relative, ferried the soul into the next world. Across time and culture, these great scavengers are never just birds. They are psychopomps, guides between life and death, between the seen and the unseen. And Göbekli Tepe seems to know this. In the Neolithic context, the dead were not always buried immediately. At sites like Çatalhöyük and Jericho, bodies were exposed, left for birds to consume, bones collected afterward. A practice called excarnation. Was Göbekli Tepe a site for this ritual too? A place where the dead were not mourned, but transformed, flesh to wind, soul to star? The presence of the vulture, especially paired with the headless human, suggests this might be more than theory. That the people of Göbekli Tepe had a complex metaphysical framework. That death, for them, was not an ending, but a passage. And the vulture? The gatekeeper, not unlike the Egyptian goddess Nekhbet or the Greek harpies, creatures who may all stem from this older idea that wings mean transition, that flight means release. And the stars? The stars were never just points of light. To people who had no cities to blind the night, the sky was story, memory, prophecy. Some researchers believe Pillar 43, the so-called Vulture Stone, records an astronomical event, a comet strike. Specifically, the impact around 10,800 BCE that triggered the Younger Dryas cooling event. The small circle above the vulture's wing may represent the sun. Other animals could correspond to constellations. And the headless human? A symbol of cataclysm. Death from above. A civilization-ending moment passed down through encoded myth. If this interpretation holds, then Göbekli Tepe is not just a temple, it's a memorial, a warning etched in stone, a record of fire, ash, and loss, passed not through language, but through symbols meant to last 10,000 years. But then comes the deeper question. If they remembered a comet, if they understood it enough to depict it in myth, that implies a continuity of knowledge. Someone saw, someone survived. Someone told the story well enough that it was carved, generations later, into a megalith meant to outlast cities. And why? Because memory, when it carries catastrophe, becomes sacred. The vulture stone may be a Rosetta Stone of prehistoric myth, but we lack the key. We see only fragments, half-meanings and broken parallels, patterns too vast to fully grasp. And yet something in us still recognizes the story, the bird, the stars, the dismembered figure. We've seen them all before, in Egypt, in Sumer, in Hindu yugas and Hopi prophecy, as if all of them are echoes of a single event, a single myth, a single memory. So what happened in 2800 BCE, and why did they want us to remember? The stone ring waits in silence, half excavated under the Turkish sun. Dust lingers in the morning light, suspended like ancient breath. Visitors peer over railings now, snapping photos, unaware that their feet rest on something older than cities, older than pyramids, older, even, than the idea of history itself. Beneath that earth, still unexcavated, lie as many as 20 more enclosures. Only a fraction of Göbekli Tepe has been uncovered. The rest remains sealed beneath layers of deliberate burial. And in that decision, to bury rather than build upon, lies a mystery no spade has yet resolved. Imagine a culture that doesn't forget by accident, but forgets on purpose, that seals its own knowledge, that entombs its great sacred places not because they were destroyed, but because they were complete, or too dangerous to leave open. Who does that? Who hides monuments meant to endure? Perhaps the builders of Göbekli Tepe weren't trying to preserve a memory. Perhaps they were trying to silence one. It's here that the spiral begins to tighten. In examining the soil layers packed around the stone circles, archaeologists discovered something strange. The fill wasn't natural. It was intentionally placed, a mix of broken tools, animal bones, fragments of sculptures, like the contents of a ritual midden. This wasn't random rubble. It was curated, as if the temple's closure was ceremonial, not accidental, like a funeral for the sacred. Even the arrangement of pillars suggests process. Some enclosures show wear, later modifications, signs of ritual reuse, then sudden burial, one after the other, over centuries. It was not a single event. It was systematic, done by people who still remembered the purpose of the site, people who decided, collectively, to shut it down. But why? One theory posits climate. The Younger Dryas, a period of sudden cooling, ended just as Göbekli Tepe rose. The earth warmed, wild grain flourished, and humans began to settle. Agriculture was born. Maybe, in a strange twist of irony, this temple, so monumental, so sacred, was a relic of the old ways, a product of hunter-gatherers. And as fields replaced foraging, as villages replaced migration, its meaning faded. It was no longer relevant. So they buried it. But the evidence doesn't quite support that. The precision, the care, the symbolic layering of fill, it all speaks of reverence, not obsolescence. Another theory cuts deeper. What if the burial wasn't just the end of a chapter, but the attempt to suppress one? In myth, memory is often dangerous. Consider Pandora's box, Eden's tree. The forbidden fruit is always knowledge, and knowledge, once tasted, changes everything. Göbekli Tepe may have been the fruit, not just a temple, but a center, a place where myth was encoded, time mapped, heavens charted, a place where something was known, and then hidden. The site itself defies categorization. There are no signs of domestic life, no ovens, no trash pits, no walls. It was not lived in, it was visited, ritualized, performed. That suggests social organization beyond what we assumed possible for 10,000 BCE. It suggests memory organized at scale, coordinated construction, specialized labor, a people with time and intent. But again, what did they know? The burial may not be about forgetting. It may be about protection, because once a story is told, it cannot be untold, and some stories, once unleashed, reshape the very world they occupy. The builders of Göbekli Tepe may have reached a threshold, may have seen too much, or survived too much, and instead of passing that burden on, they chose silence, they chose stone, they chose depth, and perhaps they believed that if buried deep enough, it would never rise again. But we are digging now, and the earth is remembering. So what happens when we unearth a story someone wanted forgotten? What truths lie still waiting beneath that unbroken hill? There is a sound to stone, not the clang of tools or the crack of fracture, but the low, resonant hum that echoes when you run your fingers across a surface carved with meaning. That's what many researchers report when standing in the center of one of Göbekli Tepe's enclosures. A silence so dense it vibrates, a pressure behind the quiet, like a breath held too long. And if you listen closely, not with ears but with awareness, you can almost hear it. Rhythm, pattern, pulse, like a drumbeat from a world before ours. Because something unspoken lives in the design. Each circle is anchored by two central T-shaped pillars. These are not simply supports, they are beings. Carved arms run along their sides, hands folded at the front, as if in solemn posture. And they face each other, always, locked in eternal stillness. It's impossible not to feel that something is being enacted between them. A dialogue? A ritual? A standoff? These are not decorations. These are participants. In some enclosures, the surrounding stones lean slightly inward, as if bowing to the central pair. Symbolically, it's powerful. The lesser gathered around the greater, a circle of witness or of submission. Whatever ceremony once echoed here, it demanded attention, order, intention, and reverence. But perhaps what matters more than the stones is the space between them. Ancient architecture often encodes sacred voids, not what is built, but what is not. Consider the Kaaba's emptiness, the Holy of Holies behind temple curtains, the echo chamber beneath Stonehenge's trilithons. In Göbekli Tepe, the space between the pillars may have represented more than access. It may have been the portal, a gateway, a threshold between worlds, not just physically but cosmologically, the place where the mythic and the real merged. Why does this matter? Because it suggests that the builders weren't just worshipping, they were mapping, like a theater designed not for drama but for contact. What if each enclosure was a stage for communion, not with gods, in the later sense, but with forces, archetypes, celestial entities not yet anthropomorphized? In many shamanic traditions, the sacred circle is a tool, a place to access altered states, communicate with spirits, reenact the cosmic story. Could Göbekli Tepe be the fossilized memory of such a practice? One scaled up to stone and star? Archaeologist Jens Notroff once suggested that the site could be understood as a stage for rituals that created and reflected collective identities. That's a sterile phrase, but it hints at something immense. Göbekli Tepe might have been not just sacred, but constitutive. A place where stories weren't told, but embodied, where memory became motion, where cosmology was not separate from society, but its very foundation. And that brings us to the carvings again. Every animal, every line, every chiseled curve is placed with care. They are not chaotic, they are recurring. The same motifs, serpent, crane, fox, boar, echo across the site. Always in different arrangements, but always returning. It's a syntax, a code, Perhaps not a language as we define it, but a system of meaning, alive with intention. And these systems speak not just to survival or fear, but to cosmology, to belief. One carving shows a crane lifting its wings beside a scorpion and a headless man. Another shows a snake slithering toward a disk. Another shows a ring of predator mouths circling a void. These are not decorations. These are dreams made durable. But again, who carved them? There are no signs of kings, priests, or hierarchy, no grand burial mounds, no names. Whoever built Göbekli Tepe did so without cities, without metal, without wheels, and yet with vision, the kind of vision that spans generations, the kind that whispers even across 12,000 years. So maybe the real story isn't what they built. It's how they built it, together, and why they left so much of it in silence. They carved without metal. That's the part modern minds trip over. The limestone pillars, some weighing between 10 to 20 tons, were shaped, moved, and lifted without bronze, without iron, without pulleys, without even the wheel. No cranes, yet they raised monuments. The terrain around Göbekli Tepe is uneven, littered with loose rock and dry shrubs. In 9600 BCE, it was denser, greener perhaps, but still rugged. The nearest quarries are close, but not adjacent. Moving even one of those stones, let alone hundreds, would require coordination. Not just labor, vision, planning. So we ask the question again. How did hunter-gatherers, whose supposed lives revolved around movement, uncertainty, survival, achieve such architectural ambition? The simplest tools were used: hammerstones, flints, basalt pounders. But simplicity does not mean lack of sophistication. Anyone who's ever carved stone will tell you, control is everything. You must feel the material, listen to its grain, anticipate its fracture. To carve a straight line into living rock takes patience. To sculpt stylized animals, perfect right angles, and symmetrical megaliths with flint alone? That requires an intimacy with stone we've forgotten. It means they weren't improvising. They were artisans. But more than that, they were coordinated, organized. This brings us into dangerous territory. Because if they were organized enough to quarry, transport, and erect these monoliths, what else were they capable of? We want to believe that agriculture came first, that only after food security did humans begin to build temples, form ideologies, craft meaning beyond survival. But Göbekli Tepe flips that. It implies that belief came first, that the temple came before the city, that myth came before the market, that spiritual necessity, not caloric efficiency, was the spark of civilization. This is not a new idea, though it's one we've resisted. Archaeologist Ian Hodder, working at nearby Çatalhöyük, noticed something similar. Spiritual symbolism interwoven into the architecture of domestic space, burials beneath homes, shrines in kitchens. He argued that religion and society were not separate categories. They were entangled. But Göbekli Tepe predates even that. And here, there are no homes, no daily life, only symbol, only performance, which means this wasn't just about subsistence, it was about the sacred, and that opens a new possibility. What if Göbekli Tepe was not simply a temple, but a machine for memory, not mechanical, but cultural? A place where rituals encoded knowledge into collective bodies, where myth and cosmos were reenacted generation after generation, not to explain the world, but to remember it, to preserve stories so vast they couldn't be told in words. We think of machines as gears and levers, but a ritual is also a mechanism. It repeats. It transforms input, belief, fear, awe, into output, Identity, unity, memory. Every circle at Göbekli Tepe might have functioned like a gear in a grander cosmological engine, not turning steel, but turning minds, shaping myth, enacting time. The idea isn't far-fetched. Many ancient structures from Stonehenge to Angkor Wat seem designed to channel ritual. Alignments with solstices, equinoxes, lunar cycles, stone encoding sky, action encoding belief. So what was Göbekli Tepe encoding? And why did the machine stop? The burial of each enclosure is not random. It marks a kind of ending, a shutting down, and yet the next ring is built, slightly different. A new version, like iterations of an idea, as if each generation refined the ritual, perfected it, and then stopped, not forgotten, but sealed. Was there a final ritual? A last circle? A moment when the machine of memory was decommissioned? And if so, what were they trying to preserve or prevent? Among the fragments scattered at Göbekli Tepe, there is one artifact that demands attention. A small carved stone, roughly the size of a hand, etched with a human figure bending forward, a phallus exposed, spine curved unnaturally. It is grotesque, almost obscene, and unlike the other carvings on the towering pillars. Some scholars call it a fertility symbol. Others say it represents transformation. But here's the problem. It doesn't belong. It feels like a different frequency, a shard of something darker. This is the paradox that Göbekli Tepe presents again and again. Grand design intertwined with primal fear. Celestial order standing beside death and decay, the beautiful and the brutal, carved with the same hand. One pillar may hold a soaring bird, the next a headless man, and woven between them, serpents, always serpents. Why snakes? The serpent motif recurs across human culture like a scar, the guardian of knowledge in Eden, the Ouroboros devouring its own tail, the naga of Hindu and Buddhist lore coiled in divine stillness. In Mesoamerican myth, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, bridges earth and sky. And in nearly every case, the snake is not just animal. It is archetype. It is transformation. At Göbekli Tepe, snakes slither across the base of pillars, rise from the ground in carved relief, sometimes near vultures, sometimes near foxes, often beneath discs. And if these discs are solar or stellar symbols, as some researchers believe, then the snakes are climbing toward the heavens. But there's another layer. In neurobiology, the serpent is embedded deep in the human mind. The amygdala, our fear center, is exquisitely tuned to snake shapes. This isn't learned. It's inherited. Evolution carved it into us long before cities, before speech. The sight of a snake doesn't just startle. It activates something older than thought. So maybe the people of Göbekli Tepe weren't just depicting snakes. Maybe they were invoking them. Fear is a powerful ritual tool. It sharpens focus. It electrifies memory. Ancient rituals across the world, from Australian Aboriginal songlines to Siberian shamanism, used fear to pierce the veil, to loosen the self, to cross into altered states. Was Göbekli Tepe a site for such crossings? And if so, what lay on the other side? Imagine the ritual, a circle of monoliths, each carved with beasts and signs, fires flickering, casting shadows that turn stone animals into living ones, drums echoing, bodies painted, dancers invoking gods or becoming them. In that space, time blurs, identity melts, the serpent rises, and the participant descends, into memory, into myth, into contact. With what? That is the question Göbekli Tepe refuses to answer. But here's something stranger. The patterns of symbolism. Vultures, serpents, foxes, lions, they're not random. They repeat across other early Neolithic sites. Tsayonu, Nevelachori, Halanchemi, all within a few hundred miles, all older than writing, all suggesting a shared symbolic grammar, a regional mythology, or perhaps a common origin. Somewhere, before all this, a story began. A story so powerful, so essential, it echoed across valleys and rivers and generations. A story preserved not in books, but in stone and blood and bone. Göbekli Tepe may be its epicenter, or perhaps only one of its chapters. So again we ask, what truth was so sacred it had to be repeated in circles of stone? And what terror was so great? It had to be buried? In 2017, something unexpected emerged from the dust. Pillar 18, larger than the rest, nearly 18 feet tall, its surface smooth, imposing, unbroken except for the gentle arc of stylized arms and folded hands. Its face is blank. No animals, no symbols, no eyes. And yet it dominates the center of enclosure D like a silent monarch, unmoving, unknowable. To stand beneath it is to feel watched, not by a gaze, but by the weight of presence. Researchers quickly noted its distinction. Unlike other pillars, Pillar 18 holds no distractions, no carvings to guide interpretation. Only that human form, arms low, hands joined. In its silence, it commands more than attention. It demands reflection. Who or what was this meant to represent? Some argue it's an ancestor, the first among them, a founding figure preserved not in flesh, but in form. Others believe it's not a person at all, but a being, a god, or an interface, the medium through which the mythic world spoke to the human one. A standing stone turned axis mundi, a pillar not just of stone, but of meaning. This idea, the axis mundi, or world axis, is ancient and global. In Norse myth, it's Yggdrasil, the world tree, connecting heavens, earth, and underworld. In Hindu cosmology, Mount Meru rises at the universe's center, around which the stars spin. The Mayans had Waka Chan, the Egyptians had the Jed pillar, and now in Göbekli Tepe, perhaps this, Pillar 18, a center that anchors the cosmos. And if that's true, then the blankness isn't a void, it's potential. It's the still point from which all myth radiates. Around it spiral symbols, beasts, events, but at the center, silence. The kind of silence that precedes the spoken word, the kind that listens. We forget sometimes how powerful absence can be. In music, it's the pause that gives rhythm meaning. In language, it's the breath between syllables that shapes speech. Göbekli Tepe understands this. The people who built it understood it. They knew that what is not carved can speak louder than what is, because the pillar is not trying to tell us something. It is trying to remind us of something we already knew, or once knew. And here is where the spiral turns again. The placement of Pillar 18 aligns not with random chance, but with celestial markers. The orientation of enclosure D suggests a knowledge of cardinal directions. Its twin pillars frame the northern sky, perhaps Polaris, the fixed star that never sets. Was this intentional? Were they pointing to permanence, to a cosmic anchor? If so, then Pillar 18 is more than symbol. It is compass. In a time before cities, before maps, before written word, this pillar may have grounded not just geography but cosmology. It oriented minds, structured memory, gave meaning to direction, to movement, to time itself. Because myth, like space, must be navigated. And perhaps this stone, featureless, massive, looming, was the North Star of memory, not telling the story, but holding it. This concept of sacred stillness repeats across traditions. The Buddha under the Bodhi tree, Christ crucified upon the still cross, the shaman in trance, the prophet in the desert, each moment frozen, central, radiating understanding not through action, but through presence. Pillar 18 may be the first of these, the original still point, the first silent God. But then we must ask, what silence does it preserve? And what did those who circled it hear? In the dust-filled stillness of Enclosure C, there lies something curiously intimate, a fragment of carved stone depicting a human face. Unlike the towering, faceless T-pillars, this fragment carries features, a brow, eyes, a nose. It's worn, yes. Time has smoothed its lines, but it's undeniably human, startlingly so, a face from 11,000 years ago, looking back. Not stylized, not abstract, just there. We weren't supposed to have this yet. According to conventional archaeology, human portraiture came much later, after agriculture, writing, hierarchy. Faces, it was thought, came with identity, with ego, with civilization. But here, on this hill of stone, a face stares from the Neolithic darkness, as if waiting for someone to remember it. What kind of culture carves gods without faces, but gives one to a human? This is not a small question. Because to carve a face is to recognize the self, to see in another the thing that thinks, that dreams, that dies. It is the beginning of reflection, not just psychological, but cultural. Göbekli Tepe may have been more than a temple. It may have been a mirror, a place where humans first looked inward and saw the eternal looking back. But what did they see? The human face fragment was found among fill material, intentionally buried, like everything else at the site. It wasn't on display. It wasn't part of a pillar. It was hidden, carefully, as if it contained something not meant to be seen, or not meant to be remembered. We return here to the pattern of concealment. Göbekli Tepe isn't just about building. It's about burying, about memory management. This isn't the chaos of a collapsed culture. It's choreography. They didn't destroy the site. They sealed it. They didn't discard the faces. They hid them. Why? One theory, radical and controversial, is that Göbekli Tepe is the final chapter of something even older, that the knowledge encoded here didn't originate here, but arrived from a culture already dying, already fractured, a culture that remembered more than it could explain, and chose instead to encode in stone, in faces, in silence. But not all faces are quiet. In 2021, another Neolithic site not far from Göbekli Tepe, Karahantepe, yielded an even stranger discovery. A life-sized human head carved into a limestone bed, surrounded by serpents and phallic shapes. Its expression is stoic, almost serene. It emerges from the stone as if being born, or as if sinking back into it. The imagery is visceral, raw, but unmistakably human, and ancient. Karahantepe and Göbekli Tepe are often called sister sites, similar in construction, similar in age. Both show organized planning, symbolism, and intentional burial. Some researchers now believe they were part of a larger ritual network, dozens of hilltop sanctuaries spread across the region, all built with astonishing sophistication. If so, then what we're looking at isn't an isolated anomaly, it's a civilization, one that built without cities, without kings, without war, a civilization of story, of symbol, of silence, and of faces that come and go like echoes through limestone. But the human face is not just about identity, it's about legacy. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the first known work of literature, The hero seeks immortality not through conquest, but through remembrance. He says, "I will carve my name where names have not been carved." He was Sumerian, but perhaps he was echoing something older. Perhaps that idea, the carving of self into time, came from here, from a face left in stone, a face not meant to be worshipped, but to be recognized. And if recognition is the seed of civilization, then perhaps Göbekli Tepe wasn't the beginning of worship. Perhaps it was the beginning of memory itself. So who was the face, and why did they hide it? The hill has a name, but it wasn't always so. Göbekli Tepe. It means potbelly hill in Turkish, a gentle mockery of the soft swell of earth that conceals what lies beneath. Before 1994, it was just another rise in the landscape. Shepherds wandered across it. Farmers tilled the soil nearby. Occasionally stones would poke through, weathered and strange. They called them gravestones, assumed they were old Ottoman ruins, or perhaps medieval markers. No one imagined what lay underfoot. But the land remembers, even when we forget. Satellite imagery, when viewed with spectral filters, reveals something astonishing. Patterns, not just the exposed enclosures archaeologists have uncovered, but hints, ghosts of others still buried. The geometry is uncanny. Circular forms in grids, alignments too consistent to be chance. The suggestion of intention scaled across acres. If true, this implies that Göbekli Tepe is not just a site. It is a complex, a sprawling network of enclosures, maybe even ceremonial districts, arranged with mathematical precision, not only in space, but possibly in time, because each circle seems to have its own phase, its own architecture, its own symbol cluster. Enclosure D, the oldest known, is the most elaborate. Later ones, CBA, grow smaller, simpler, less adorned. It's a reverse evolution, as if something is fading, dying, not biologically but mythically. Imagine this. A culture rises not on economics, but on shared cosmology. Its foundation isn't trade, but meaning. And over time, as memory dilutes, as symbols become stories and stories become habits, the power wanes, the circles shrink, the carvings grow fewer, until finally the last is buried not in reverence, but in resignation, and then silence. This pattern, rise, refinement, decline, is echoed in mythology worldwide. The Hindu yugas, the Greek ages of man, the Hopi worlds. Each describes time not as a straight line, but a cycle, a spiral, beginning in golden unity, descending into fragmentation. What if Göbekli Tepe is a fossil of such a cycle? Not the start of history, but the end of a chapter far older than we admit. Geologists studying the region note something fascinating. The site's elevation offers line of sight to multiple Neolithic mounds nearby: Karahan Tepe, Harbetsuvan, Seyburç. Some researchers now believe these were linked not just culturally, but optically. Light could travel from hill to hill, fire signals, processions, a ritual corridor, a sacred geography. This echoes later megalithic systems, the ley lines of Britain, the Seke lines of the Andes, the alignments in ancient China. Lines of sight, of power, of myth. We often dismiss these as coincidence. But again and again, ancient cultures align their most sacred structures, not randomly, but with reference to stars, landforms, each other. Göbekli Tepe might have been the node in such a network. A central place not just geographically, but spiritually. And yet we only found it because of chance, because of a shepherd, because of a decision not to dismiss those strange stones. So how many other hills are hiding stories? How many mounds are not geological, but intentional? The land may be quiet, but it is speaking, and we are only now learning to listen. At first it seems like a curiosity, a carved belt etched around the base of a pillar, not ornate, not attention-seeking, just two parallel lines wrapping the torso of the T-shape, interrupted by a small H symbol. Sometimes there's a buckle, sometimes a loincloth. The figures remain faceless, their arms folded, their hands meeting just below the belt line. And yet, this detail, the belt, appears again and again. It's easy to miss, but once you see it, you realize something strange. They were clothed. The pillars were not abstractions. They were anthropomorphic. And the garments were specific, repeated, intentional. In a world supposedly pre-agricultural, pre-hierarchical, pre-symbolic, why would anyone dress stone? This opens a line of inquiry rarely addressed in archaeology. Identity through adornment. A belt is more than a strap. It's cultural shorthand, a marker of rank, of role, of ritual. In ancient societies, the belt was often sacred, a liminal device between body and spirit. Shamans wore ritual belts adorned with charms. Sumerian gods were depicted with roped sashes. The Norse god Thor wore meggingjord, a belt of strength. The Japanese samurai's sash defined his status, repeated across the world, across time. So whose belts are these? The H symbol carved onto several of them complicates things further. It doesn't match any known Neolithic writing. But it's also not decorative. It's deliberate, always centered, always etched with the same proportions. Some speculate it could represent a gate, a ladder, even an abstract representation of duality. Two uprights joined by a crossbar. Portal. Threshold. Some researchers point out that similar motifs appear on other Neolithic sites in the region, and even in later alphabets. The Proto-Sinaitic script, for instance, contains early forms of H that signify breath, spirit, or enclosure. In Indo-European linguistics, H sounds often correlate with exhalation, with the divine wind. It's speculation, of course, but it leads somewhere, because belts are not just physical, they are symbolic bindings. To gird oneself is to prepare. For battle, for ritual, for transformation. In magical traditions, the cincture defines the sacred space of the body. In monastic dress, it separates the holy from the profane. And here, at Göbekli Tepe, it may have done the same. Are we looking at gods, or ancestors, or something in between? If these T-pillars are beings, and not merely statues, then the garments they wear suggest purpose, function, perhaps even hierarchy. Pillar 18 and its counterparts may not have represented interchangeable forms. They may have played roles. Enclosure D's twin monoliths, standing at the heart of the circle, could be seen as actors or officiants around whom the ritual turned. So what was the ritual? The carvings don't tell us directly. They don't show scenes in sequence. They offer fragments, a vulture here, a fox there, a belt wrapping the torso. And always, always that facelessness, that void where a face might be. We're left with implication, not instruction. But the absence, again, is the message. It may be that the beings depicted were not meant to be seen, that their power came precisely from being hidden, that their garments, their belts, their symbols were the only parts of them humans could safely replicate. Like ceremonial masks or tabernacles, they protected the essence from exposure, because direct contact with the divine has always been dangerous. So the belt was more than fashion. It was a boundary between the mortal and the mythic, between memory and forgetting. And if that's the case, If each belt was a symbol of containment, then perhaps Göbekli Tepe itself was the largest belt of all, a circle of stone wrapped around the unknown, holding something in, or holding something out. It begins with dust, not the kind that settles after centuries, but the fine, deliberate kind, the kind sifted through fingers, packed into crevices, chosen grain by grain. Excavation teams noticed it early on. The backfill inside each enclosure at Göbekli Tepe wasn't just thrown in. It was layered, sorted, purposeful, as if someone had engineered not just the temple, but its burial. This runs counter to everything we understand about abandonment. When a structure is left behind, nature takes over. Collapse, erosion, weathering, all chaotic. But here we see choreography. The stones weren't knocked over, they were protected. Entire enclosures filled with crushed limestone, animal bones, broken tools, burnt offerings, buried alive. Why? To bury a sacred space is not just to end it, it is to seal it, to finalize its role in time. And this brings us to a strange hypothesis, that Göbekli Tepe wasn't simply constructed, it was ritually programmed, like a machine with a life cycle. Design, activation, performance, deactivation, not unlike the way later temples would be decommissioned in ancient Egypt, or how Tibetan mandalas, intricate sand worlds, are built with painstaking precision only to be swept away. Impermanence in this framework is not destruction, it's completion. But what was the performance? The objects buried alongside the pillars offer fragments, obsidian tools, animal figurines, beads carved from limestone and chlorite, grinding stones, hammerstones, projectile points. These weren't trash, they were chosen. Many show signs of wear, ritual usage. Some seem broken deliberately, killed before burial, a practice mirrored across time in cultures from pre-Columbian Mesoamerica to Iron Age Europe. Among the bones, the variety is startling. Wild boar, gazelle, aurochs, birds, even small reptiles. No consistent pattern, no obvious dietary profile. This wasn't about feeding. It was about offering, about sacrifice. So were these rituals of fertility, death, renewal? Perhaps all three. Consider the surrounding landscape. Göbekli Tepe sits between the Euphrates and Tigris on the northern edge of the Fertile Crescent, where wheat first grew wild. Recent pollen studies reveal that einkorn, a wild ancestor of wheat, flourished nearby. Could it be that rituals here were linked to the rhythms of wild harvest? That the builders gathered not just to carve, but to call upon the land itself? Agriculture may not have caused the temple. The temple may have caused agriculture. This flips a foundational assumption in human history. We thought people settled to grow food. But what if they gathered first for meaning, and then realized they needed to feed the crowd? Göbekli Tepe may have created the conditions for domestication, not as an economic necessity but a social byproduct. We came together to worship, to remember, to reenact myth, and in doing so, we accidentally stayed. And when the story was done, we buried the stage. But buried stages leave traces. Some of the stone fragments in the fill show signs of recarving. Older motifs overwritten. One animal replacing another, a scorpion erased, a boar added. This suggests the myths evolved, that over centuries, even the sacred was reinterpreted. Rituals changed, gods changed, meaning, like water, found new channels. And perhaps at some point, they realized the story no longer fit the stones. So they filled them in. Not with rage, with reverence, They buried the old world gently, which leaves us with a troubling possibility. What if we're not looking at a civilization rising? What if we're looking at one descending the stairs, closing the book, turning off the light? And if so, what came before the burial? What came before the temple? It's not what's present at Göbekli Tepe that keeps archaeologists awake at night. It's what's missing. No domestic structures, no hearths, no burial chambers, no tools of daily life, apart from what was deliberately entombed. No clay pots, because pottery hadn't yet arrived. No bricks, because cities had not yet emerged. Just stone, shaped and set in perfect, deliberate circles. And something else. There is no writing, no script, no visible language. And yet, it speaks through animals, forms, positions, through silence, through repetition. It speaks in a voice older than text, a voice built of memory, of gesture, of geometry. And if it's not writing, then what is it? Enter the field of symbolic anthropology. Scholars like Claude Lévi-Strauss argued that myth is a structure of the mind, that across cultures, similar binary patterns, life and death, sky and earth, male and female, shape narrative. At Göbekli Tepe, these oppositions echo. Dual central pillars, animals of sky and earth, life carved beside symbols of death. It's not chaotic, it's organized. But organized how? Some believe the builders had no language as we understand it, yet encoded meaning through what's now called iconic syntax, the deliberate arrangement of non-verbal signs to communicate complex concepts. Think of comic books, hieroglyphs, emoji strings. Meaning emerges not from individual signs, but from the pattern. Göbekli Tepe may be our oldest surviving message in that format. Consider Pillar 43 again, the so-called vulture stone. A scorpion, a vulture, a disc, a decapitated figure. Some see astronomy, others see mythology. A few believe it encodes an event, possibly a cataclysm, a celestial impact. And here, the theories fracture. Graham Hancock and other proponents of the lost civilization theory point to the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, the idea that around 10,800 BCE, a comet struck Earth, triggering climate chaos, extinction events, and a collapse of earlier human networks. They argue that Göbekli Tepe preserves this memory, that its carvings are not decorative, but historical, a warning, a record. Mainstream archaeologists scoff at this. There is no definitive proof, they say. The carbon layers are uncertain, the impact crater remains disputed. And yet, myths around the world describe a similar rupture. A fire from the sky, floods, darkness, the fall of a golden age. Coincidence or convergence? We must be cautious. Speculation can seduce. But we must also admit the limits of our models. If Göbekli Tepe truly dates back to 9600 BCE, it predates Mesopotamian cuneiform by 6,000 years. That's more time between Göbekli and Sumer than between Sumer and us. So what do we call it? A prehistory of prehistory? An anomaly? Or a remnant? The issue may not be age, but assumption. We think writing is necessary for memory, that without records, nothing can endure. But oral cultures prove otherwise. Australian Aboriginal songlines transmit geographic, spiritual, and ecological knowledge across millennia through song and rhythm. Native American petroglyphs encode complex cosmology in rock. The Dogon people of Mali retain detailed astronomical knowledge through generational storytelling. Göbekli Tepe may be another such archive, not a place of words, a place of remembering. And if that's the case, then our tools, spades, brushes, LiDAR scans, can only reveal the skeleton. The soul remains encrypted in symbols we have yet to feel, let alone decode. But the idea that someone tried to preserve knowledge across ice ages, across collapse, is staggering. That a message was left not in papyrus, but in stone circles, unreadable now perhaps, but intended for someone. For us? So the question changes, not what does it mean, but who was it meant for? The sky above Göbekli Tepe was darker then. No cities to drown the stars, no satellites, no power lines, no noise, just the cold breath of night and a sky so vast it felt alive. It's hard for us now, even in the most remote places, to grasp how the ancients saw the heavens, not as backdrop, not as aesthetic, but as structure, a living text, a divine machine, and it may be here, above the pillars, beyond the circles, where the true message of Göbekli Tepe lives. Some researchers believe the site was a kind of observatory, not in the modern sense with telescopes and calibrated instruments, but as a ritual sky interface. The alignment of enclosure D with the rising of Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, is no longer seen as coincidence. Around 9100 BCE, Sirius began to appear just before dawn in this region, becoming a heliacal rising star. In Egypt, thousands of years later, its appearance would signal the Nile flood and the new year. But what if the association is older? What if Göbekli Tepe was tracking Sirius long before pharaohs rose from the sand? Astronomer Giulio Magli proposed that enclosure D's twin central pillars may have framed this event, creating a kind of celestial gate, an annual alignment that marked time not in days, but in mythic cycles, a rebirth of the star, a resurrection of the divine. The presence of vultures and headless figures on surrounding stones may support this. Death and transformation, the soul's release, the celestial journey. Across cultures, the rising of Sirius is tied to rebirth. In ancient Greece, it marked midsummer madness. In Mesopotamia, it was tied to Ishtar and Tammuz. In Dogon tradition, Sirius B, an invisible companion star, is a source of deep cosmic knowledge, long known to the tribe despite being unseeable without modern instruments. These patterns don't prove contact, but they suggest resonance, echoes of a shared symbolic framework. Sirius as memory, as marker, as God. So imagine, each year, as Sirius blinked back into the sky after months of invisibility, the people of Göbekli Tepe gathered. The temples were activated. Drums, fires, the twin pillars framed the moment. And something was reenacted. A cosmic event, a myth, a return, not for entertainment, not for astronomy, for continuity. To align oneself with the stars is to remember who you are, and perhaps who you were. But alignment is only one layer. The carvings suggest knowledge not just of stars, but of time. The serpent, often seen alongside circular motifs, may signify precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that causes the stars' positions to shift over thousands of years. Most people never notice it, but over centuries, it becomes visible. Patterns drift. Constellations rise where none were before. To detect it requires long observation, generational awareness, myth calibrated to the stars. Sweatman and Sekritsis, two researchers pushing the edge of archaeological theory, suggest that the Vulture stone may encode a record of the Younger Dryas impact event, linked to a possible comet collision. In their reading, the animals are constellations, the headless figure a casualty of celestial wrath. It is not just a story, it is an eyewitness account. Mainstream archaeologists resist this, and rightly so. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, but still, the stones stand, the patterns repeat, and the question won't go away. What if Göbekli Tepe was not just built to look at the stars, but to speak to them? In many traditions, sacred architecture is participatory. Temples are not houses for gods. They are instruments. When activated through ritual, they become transmitters. Sound, intention, energy, Tibetan stupas, Mayan ball courts, Gothic cathedrals, all designed to resonate with something beyond. Göbekli Tepe may have done the same. Its circles, its pillars, its silence, all part of a language we've forgotten how to speak. But the stars remember, and they're still listening. Walk 10 minutes north from the exposed enclosures and you'll reach a gentle slope one archaeologists call Area E. It hasn't drawn the same attention as the more famous circles, but what lies there changes everything because the pillars are smaller, cruder, shallower in their carvings, and yet older, much older. Buried beneath stratified layers of limestone and flint, these rudimentary monoliths may predate Enclosure D by centuries, maybe more, which means Göbekli Tepe isn't just old, it evolved. The perfection of the main circles was not spontaneous, it was learned. But who taught them? This question takes us outside the realm of archaeology and into evolutionary psychology. Because when we ask how a people with no cities, no script, and no metallurgy learned to engineer and align multi-ton stones with celestial precision, we confront a paradox. Such complexity shouldn't arise without institutional scaffolding. And yet, it did. The answer may lie in something called cultural memory. Long before written language, long before hierarchies, human groups developed sophisticated oral systems for storing and transmitting information: song, gesture, ritual, repetition. These weren't entertainment, they were memory machines. And just like neural networks reinforce themselves through repeated firing, cultural memory strengthens with each iteration. Göbekli Tepe may have been the product of such a network. Not a centralized authority, but distributed genius. Knowledge passed along migration routes, across generations, via song, symbol, and stone. And perhaps those early humble pillars at Area E were the first attempts to stabilize the sacred. The first trials. The first encoding. Like sketches before a masterpiece. The mind before the myth. But this also raises the possibility that Göbekli Tepe was not the first. That the impulse to mark time, to shape memory, to embed myth in matter, predated even this site. What if Göbekli Tepe was not the origin of civilization, but its echo, a second draft, a reconstruction? If that sounds fantastical, consider this. Even in later civilizations, the memory of lost epics haunted collective imagination. The Sumerians spoke of antediluvian kings who ruled for thousands of years. The Egyptians wrote of Zep Tepi, the first time, when gods walked among men. The Greeks told of Atlantis. The Hindus described cyclical ages, with each yuga marking a descent from perfection to chaos. Could it be that Göbekli Tepe was constructed in the aftermath of such a fall? A sanctuary of salvage? A memory palace built atop ruin? We have no texts, no tablets, no tombs. But what we do have are patterns, patterns that persist across space and time, surfacing like islands in a forgotten sea. The twin pillars, the circular plans, the axis, the animal codes, the star alignments. These are not unique to Anatolia. They echo in the stone circles of Britain, in the kivas of the American Southwest, in the temples of Peru, and the myths of the Pacific. Did they come from a shared source? Or from the same human longing? Because perhaps it wasn't a lost civilization that passed knowledge to Göbekli Tepe. Perhaps it was loss itself. Loss sharpens memory. Trauma anchors myth. In the wake of catastrophe, survivors preserve what matters. They do not rebuild cities. They rebuild meaning. Göbekli Tepe may be that impulse, made stone, the need to hold on, to make time pause, to say in limestone, "We were here, we knew something. Please remember." And now we stand above it, millennia later, listening. So what were they trying to recover? And what did they fear we would forget? Imagine this, the last gathering, not the beginning, but the end, the final ritual at Göbekli Tepe. A dusk wind stirring dust through the hollow spaces between the great pillars. Fires lit not to celebrate, but to mourn. The circle, once alive with symbols and rhythm, standing in solemn silence. And the people, older now, fewer. They've carved less. The motifs are simpler. The walls lower. Something has changed. The memory is dimming. Perhaps they no longer remember the reason they built the first enclosure, only that it was sacred, only that the twin pillars must always face each other, only that the snake must circle beneath the fox, ritual surviving reason, form outliving meaning. This is not fiction. This is the pattern seen in every great cultural arc, a golden age, a crystallization, and then entropy. Tradition becomes habit, ceremony becomes mimicry, knowledge becomes superstition. We see it even in the archaeological layers. The earliest enclosures are the most refined. Later ones show haste, less planning, as if the builders were following instructions without understanding them, like copying a song whose language you've forgotten. What Göbekli Tepe reveals isn't just the birth of civilization, it's its slow forgetting. And maybe that forgetting was by design. There is something haunting about a culture that buries its own greatness, that entombs the symbols it once worshipped. What compels a society to not just walk away, but seal its memory? Maybe it was fear. Fear of misuse. Fear that the myths would corrode, would mutate into falsehoods. We see this fear in later spiritual traditions. The hidden name of God, the sealed scrolls of revelation, the esoteric rites of mystery schools. Not everything is meant to be remembered. Or perhaps it wasn't fear. Perhaps it was grief. Because to remember too clearly is also to ache. To hold in your mind the image of something that once was, vibrant, meaningful, alive, and know it is gone. Memory can be holy, but it can also be unbearable, so they buried the stones, circle by circle, like laying family to rest, and then they walked away, not far perhaps. The descendants of Göbekli Tepe would go on to shape other places, Çatalhöyük, Nevaluchori, the Halaf culture. They would farm, they would build, they would tell new stories. But something was left behind, not just the pillars, but the impulse, the original myth, the axis mundi, the contract with the stars. We can trace it in Mesopotamia's ziggurats, in the stepped temples of Mesoamerica, in the dome of the Pantheon, in the cathedrals whose ribs echo ribs of ancient stone. Always we return to the circle, to the center, to the silence between two pillars. We inherit more than genes. We inherit geometry. We inherit myth. The same patterns echo, not because of cultural diffusion alone, but because we are the same species, haunted by the same needs, the need to belong, to remember, to mean something. And perhaps that's why Göbekli Tepe was buried, to protect the myth until we were ready to listen again, to keep the message intact across time's corrosion, to wait. And now we've begun to hear it, not fully, not clearly, but enough to know it speaks. So what happens if we dig deeper? What if the oldest enclosure, the one still hidden beneath the mound, holds the first symbol? And what if it's not an animal, but a map without roads? That's how some describe the carvings on Göbekli Tepe's pillars. Symbols without legend, constellations without stars, creatures caught mid-motion but going nowhere, and yet they're placed with such intention that to call them decorative feels insulting. These weren't etched by idle hands. They're too precise, too persistent, too consistent. So what if these carvings are a map? Not of land, of thought. Because the greatest journeys aren't always across deserts or seas. Some unfold within the architecture of the mind, through story, symbol, ceremony. And if Göbekli Tepe was meant to guide, perhaps it wasn't meant to take you anywhere physical. Perhaps it was a cartography of consciousness. There's precedent for this. In Aboriginal Australia, songlines crisscross the continent, melodies that chart paths across geography and spirit simultaneously. Each verse corresponds to a location, but also a story, a mythic origin. To walk the song is to walk both land and memory. In ancient India, the mandala, a sacred diagram, traces the cosmos through nested symbols. It is both map and mechanism, a visual meditation, a tool for aligning the self with the divine. The Tibetans build these from sand, only to destroy them. Because maps aren't always destinations. Sometimes they're portals. Göbekli Tepe may be one of these. The concentric circles, the animals in patterns, the twin pillars at the center. It resembles a living mandala, sculpted not from pigment, but stone. Not made to be seen from above like a drawing, but walked, inhabited. A temple of steps and sightlines, and within it, a code. But to decipher a code, you need a key. Some researchers now suggest that the enclosures at Göbekli Tepe represent different phases of the cosmos, not just physical time, solstices, equinoxes, but mythical time, the age before ages, the time before humans became what we are now. Carl Jung called this the collective unconscious, a psychic reservoir of symbols shared across cultures. In this view, the animals of Göbekli Tepe are not just animals, they are archetypes, the scorpion, the serpent, the bird, the predator, each a node in the mythic mind, recurring, evolving, speaking in silence. And when we map them, not just physically but conceptually, something begins to emerge, a grammar. Not of spoken words, but of symbolic function. Predator and prey, ascent and descent, transformation and stillness, all held in balance, all returning to the center, and the center always is two pillars. This duality isn't random. In myth, the number 2 holds power, yin and yang, light and dark, life and death. It is the tension that births meaning. In architecture, dual pillars often mark thresholds, the Jachin and Boaz of Solomon's temple, the torii gate of Shinto shrines, the lintels of megalithic tombs. To pass between them is to enter a liminal space. Göbekli Tepe's twin pillars may have served the same purpose, not doors, initiations. Between them, something was meant to happen, not physically, psychically. Perhaps the circles were ritual theaters for reenacting the cosmic story, performed not for entertainment, but for remembrance. And those who passed through the twin stones weren't entering a building. They were entering a state, a pattern of mind. And that's why the carvings matter. That's why they repeat. Not because they're literal, but because they encode transitions across worlds, across selves. So the pillars are not monuments, they are coordinates, fixed points in an invisible map, a map not of Earth, but of us. And if that's true, If we're walk at the outline of a story once known, then what waits at its center? What was the destination of this ancient journey? And did the people who carved it ever arrive? Sometimes, in the cold early morning before the site opens, the archaeologists pause. They look out over the half-revealed stone circles, the sun lifting low across the Anatolian plateau, casting long shadows from pillars older than written history. And in that light, Göbekli Tepe stops being a site and becomes a question. A quiet, open question that seems to whisper, not what was this, but why did we stop building like this? Because the truth is unsettling. The people who built Göbekli Tepe didn't vanish. They didn't collapse. They changed. Over time, they stopped carving. They stopped aligning. They began planting, domesticating, settling. They began to build different things. Granaries, ovens, walls. Slowly they turned their backs on the circle and faced the square. And civilization as we know it began. But something was lost in that shift. Göbekli Tepe is not a monument to dominance. It has no walls, no battlements, no royal inscriptions. It doesn't glorify conquest. It glorifies order, cosmic order, mythic symmetry, the balance between creature and star, spirit and stone. And when we buried that place, did we also bury the idea of living within that order? We replaced it with hierarchy. Kings, empires, war. Writing gave us history, but history gave us forgetting. Not of facts, of ways. Göbekli Tepe is not a story about what we knew. It's a story about what we chose to stop knowing. Its silence says it best. What kind of world do you build when you don't carve faces on your gods? What kind of ritual do you practice when you don't have kings? What kind of memory do you pass on when you carve it not into paper, but into pillars designed to outlast earthquakes? It's easy to romanticize the past, but Göbekli Tepe isn't soft, it's hard, brutal, built with blood and stone and fire. It took immense labor. People suffered for it. They must have believed in it deeply, or feared what would happen if they stopped. And yet, stop they did. Eventually, the circles ended. The shovels came out. They filled their own sanctuaries with rubble and tools and bones, not abandoned, buried, on purpose. And that burial, too, is a message. Maybe they believed their myth had ended, that the world had turned, that the beings they once honored no longer listened, or that the knowledge was too dangerous to preserve above ground. Perhaps they believed something was coming. A forgetting, a flood. A time when symbols would mean nothing, and stones would be just stones again. So they hid the truth inside the earth. Not to destroy it, to preserve it. And now we're the ones digging, decoding, trying to piece together a puzzle left by hands far steadier, far more certain than ours. It's humbling, because every pillar we raise from the soil is also a mirror, reflecting not just their world, but ours, their obsessions, their reverence, their silence, what they chose to honor and what they chose to bury. And the deeper we go, the clearer it becomes. This wasn't just the beginning of something. It was also the end of something else. And we, standing centuries later, grasping at fragments, are not just rediscovering the first temple. We are excavating the memory of who we used to be. So then comes the final question. If this is what they left behind, what didn't they show us? The last hill has not yet been excavated. Beneath the gentle swell that remains untouched for 12,000 years, lies what may be the oldest structure of them all. Enclosure H. Maybe more. No one knows for certain how many circles wait beneath the soil, still sleeping. The archaeologists mark it on their maps. They speak of it in quiet tones. It is too deep, too fragile, too sacred to disturb. Not yet, not yet. And so we wait. And as we wait, we return, once again, to the spiral. Because Göbekli Tepe has not given us closure. It has given us a loop. Each circle leads to another. Each symbol folds inward. Each pillar points not to a conclusion, but to a beginning we can't quite see. We wanted a temple. We found a mirror. We wanted a cradle of civilization. We found a sealed tomb of memory. We wanted progress. We found recurrence. Time is not a straight road. It coils, it hums, it forgets itself. And sometimes, in rare places, it remembers. Göbekli Tepe is one of those places. A knot in history, a wound, a whisper. And it doesn't explain itself. That, perhaps, is the most modern thing we keep expecting. An answer. We want to know who they were, what they believed, why they built, why they stopped. But the stones remain silent. Not because they don't know, but because they speak in a language older than explanation. They speak through presence, weight, form, silence. So perhaps the question is not, what does it mean? Perhaps it's, what does it awaken in us? Why does this place, this impossible place, call to us now, in this moment of noise and fracture and forgetting? Why do we look back so far to the moment before history and feel that we recognize something? Maybe because deep down we know. We know that memory is more than information. It is ritual, pattern, form. We know that story is not just entertainment, it is survival. And we know that sacredness is not a concept, it is a structure, not a belief, a design carved into circles, set beneath stars, written not with ink, but with stone so heavy it requires 100 hands to lift. And those hands? They were like ours. Fingers cracked, eyes squinting, hearts beating. They carved not for us, but through us. They didn't know our names, but they knew we would come. And when we did, they wanted us to feel it, the center, the silence, the memory that breathes without breath. So we stand now in the shadow of the first temple, or the last, or both. And the stones ask us nothing. They only wait for the next circle to begin, for the next voice to remember. And perhaps that is all that's ever mattered. Not building, not believing, but remembering and returning. And so, dear listener, as the last echoes of Göbekli Tepe fade into sleep, we leave you not with answers, but with the question that brought us here in the first place. What if we were never the first? And what if the memory we are chasing is our own